But what you're saying is that to get that right balance, to get that nice coating, the actual pH number will depend on the particular conditions.
The matrix, we call it, the water we call it matrix. The matrix is the H2O plus the calcium carbonate plus all of those other things that are in water. And our matrix may be different than Sebring's matrix, which may be different from Akron's. And it may be, you know, every location is going to be a little different.
So you have to find the particular pH at your location that will give you that ideal balance.
And there are, you know, there are scientific ways that have been developed to do that. So I can't speak to 7.2, but for us, that would be a corrosive water.
What's the source of all this lead? It comes out of the plant with no lead. Where's the lead come from?
It's coming from basically the old pipes in the distribution system.
The pipes aren't lead.
Or a lot of the connections is lead in the solder connecting all the joints. Right, not anymore. So it's more in older situations. Like newer constructions, like Dr. Tridigo was saying, are mostly plastic-based pipes right now to avoid that type of issue. So it is in more established locations. Yeah.
I have a question for Dr. Kumar. Yes. Because I know you mentioned for the Safe Water Drinking Act that did not cover individual wells. Right. So if you have an allotment of people that have about 10, 15 households to a specific well for like reverse osmosis water, do you think Act might cover that? Because that seems like there would be more people in that well.
That's a good question. There are certain parameters and a certain number of people and above are regulated. I don't know if 15 is large enough. I feel like I've seen something about 25, but I don't know for certain. That would be something that you'd need to look into. Are they all on the same well, or they're using the same?
Well, I live on a lot of land, so we drink from a well, and it's about, I think, 10, 15 households. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know if we were under that act, but
you're close to the threshold. I agree that it's somewhere in the lower tens of houses is what the threshold is. Off the top of my head, I don't remember it either.
Yeah, I will say it's not all that expensive to have it tested. If you're curious, we've certainly done that at a previous house where we lived and had it tested and got the results back, and then you could see what was what. So you might, if you're concerned, it's probably worth doing that.
Are we talking about lead?
Were you talking about lead or just anything? Any lead specifically? Okay.
Lead test is about $25, and you also get copper with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can request just lead, and I suspect that's going to be the same. They're going to charge you the same whether you want the copper.
And I think you can choose even different batteries of tests that you want, and then the cost varies based on what it is you want in the report. There's a question back.
I have a question for Dr. Tridigo. You had that rating rubric of how American water was rated. How does that compare to other countries? Because I was under the impression that American compared favorably to at least the countries like Mexico and China that have really poor drinking water quality.
Yeah, so certainly the quality of our water treatment facilities is much, much better than many of the developing countries. And so the water coming out of the water treatment facilities is much better. In a country like maybe China or Brazil, they've had a lot of brand new construction. And so those pipes are made out of the HDPE plastic instead of most of our pipes being made out of steel, the ductile iron, which has a potential for, over the years, to cause the water quality to decrease. And so I would say that for sure we are better when it comes to our water treatment, but our infrastructure, I would say, is not necessarily way above most of the developing countries that are kind of in that brick countries, the developing countries that are coming up quickly, because most of their growth has happened in the last 20 years. And so the infrastructure is mostly less than 20 years old compared to ours being anywhere up to over 100 years old at this point. Josh.
I suppose I have a question maybe for all three of you, but it might be directed more toward Dr. Booth. I think, if I heard you say right, they switched from Lake Huron to one of the local rivers or something, and I just wanted to know what that particularly changed when the entire my limited knowledge, I didn't know if there was any lead before the change.
Yeah, some of this was in the Flint situation. The main issue was that the water was the source water was much more corrosive, and a number of aspects, the acidity of it, there was a lot of road salt, chlorine and other salt content in it, that made that corrosion much stronger in the source water, which made it much more difficult to treat. And so there was a lot of industrial contamination, and it's possible that some of that could have been contributing lead in the source water. But another significant issue was just a larger corrosion, again, corroding the pipes in the distribution system rather than the source. Yeah.
I think it brings up one of Dr. Kumler's points about the importance of protecting our source waters. Lake Michigan is a large body, and so we can pollute it, and it's not as densely concentrated as the Flint River was concentrated. So that brings in the Clean Water Act and our attempts to keep our rivers clean, that has a direct correlation and direct correlation to the quality of the water that comes out of our pipes. So the cleaner our waters are that we pull out of, the more clean your water is likely to be, or the less work that the water treatment plant operators have to do in order to clean up the water, and it's less expensive for us to clean the water if we can just keep our rivers clean to begin with.
For Dr. Booth again, in Flint, they seem to have a lot of skin conditions, and is that related strictly to the lead like Sebring has, or were there other contributing factors in Flint that caused the people to have the skin breaking out from that?
Yeah, it could be possible that there were other contaminants in the water that also led to skin rashes and things like that. But that is a common and a typical response to chronic continual lead ingestion.
The levels in Flint were drastically higher than what Sebring is seeing.
Correct.
So at the 0.2 or whatever that Sebring's seen, would that have a problem with skin contact at that lower level, or is that only at a higher level?
It does depend person to person. Just the response that you're going to have. So I can't say for certain no one would get a rash of this condition or not. Another thing you have to consider the total amount of lead that was ingested over time. And so if the Flint scenario had been going on well over a year, over that span, they've ingested a much larger total quantity of lead, where I would expect it to be much more observable health responses than in the Sebring situation.
Can that be filtered out by the end user, or is that not an option like for Flint that they would have to replace the entire infrastructure? And is there an economical way that these people can solve the problem filtering the water, or is that?
Well, I mean, they're already responding. They're adding phosphate to the water at Flint, which again bringing up the pH, so less acidity, more alkalinity, kind of that coating we talked about. So they are taking that approach. It's possible that some of the pipes are just so far degraded that they may need replacement. In terms of the consumer further treating the water that they're getting out of the faucet, it is possible to purchase filters that remove lead. You have, if you take like a common Brita or some other common brand, just a filter you have in your fridge, those can remove some amount of dissolved lead, but not particulate solid particles. Whereas a lot of the filters that you buy, where you connect at the faucet, those are able to remove both the dissolved lead and the lead particles, because if it's hooked up at the faucet, there's greater pressure which can push the water through and filter those out, where the ones that go in your fridge are just going by gravity, and so there's not enough pressure to push the water through at a reasonable rate. And so you can buy certified lead removing filters that aren't astronomically expensive. that are certified to remove as much as 99% of the lead. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess any of you can answer this. I'm from Cleveland, and so I've like heard stories about Lake Erie having like caught fire before and things like that. So the problem with flint and their lead, is that a problem that could be seen in like Lake Erie too?
So you're probably thinking of the Cuyahoga River catching fire, and that was one event that helped precipitate the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, the whole suite of environmental legislation that we saw starting in the early 70s. And in terms of, whether it could happen with the pipe part, I can't necessarily answer that. But the Great Lakes are regulated a little bit differently, and they are also shared with Canada. So the US and Canada actually have a compact that regulates water withdrawals and pollutants and that type of thing into the Great Lakes watershed. So in some ways they have higher scrutiny than maybe other bodies of water do, which I would say is a good thing if you are using that water, but it doesn't mean obviously it's perfect. Lake Erie has still had problems with algae and things like that. Yeah.
Hold on,
Sorry.
Dean wanted to.
Can I ask?
Yes, absolutely.
The Cuyahoga River caught fire 13 times. The last time in, was it 68, 69, was when the country was going through this awakening about environmental. It's no longer dilution is the answer to pollution, and the Environmental Protection Agency, I believe, started in 71 or 72. Just happened to be when I was going to college, so I remember these things. I'm starting to forget them because of my age, but I do remember them now. And that last fire was precipitated by chemicals from like Pittsburgh Plate Glass and a few other companies who were just releasing their chemicals into the water that were organic chemicals that were volatile and explosive or flammable. They don't do that. At least I don't think they do, unless they try to get away with it.
Mr. Stricker, we were talking about the age of water. Is the water in the reserve towers circulated anyway?
I don't believe that it is.
So it could be very stale.
Well, water comes into it and goes out of it at whatever the demand is. But a very large storage facility with a low demand would cause water to be stale. Yeah, so it's possible. I don't know much about whether there's a mixer in there to keep it completely mixed, or water just goes in.
Our water age is about 5 days by the time it gets out to out to Oak Hill, which is an extremity in our system. But it goes through the pipes on the north side of town, and then it goes into the 3 million gallon tank, which does not have stirring. And from there, it's boosted, or it's pumped into the high side of town and filling the towers out by the mall and the one on Clark Street that's just south of the campus. So the 3 million gallon tank that you see right across the street over here actually is not stirred by a stirrer. The towers that you see at the mall and Clark Street are not stirred, but as the water goes in, there is some movement. We regulate the flow of water by, it's like a piston action. In order to keep fresh water moving through the system, we drop the 3 million gallon tank by filling the towers. Then we fill the 3 million gallon tank as the towers decrease. So it's like a piston system in the water system, and we're moving water through as fast as we can by dropping the level to about 40% of the level in the tank. So even though there's not stirring, we are sending that water on through the system, and as the water comes in, there is some movement, in the tank. But we don't have stirrers. You can buy those. If you'd like to chip in and donate no money, but they're probably about $500,000.
And if the furthest extremity of the age is 5 days, then you know that the time that the water spends in that tank is going to be less than 5 days.
It's the extremities where
Right, so
there isn't much demand, and it's not many people
drawing the water out of the pipes.
Is there any legal actions that can be taken against Rick Snyder and his government for allowing the water to be contaminated for over, I think, 3 years? Because it's been like since 2013.
In Flint.
Yeah, and also, how could the EPA on the state level allow the waters that have been contaminated that long if they do thoroughly check it?
So there has been a class action lawsuit filed in the case of Flint, and it's actually available online. You might want to look at it. It's pretty interesting, and obviously it's just one side of the story because we can see what is being alleged, but it's suggests that the knowledge was already there regarding the corrosiveness of the water, and that for $60 a day they could have remediated the situation and chose not to. So I can't speak as to what actually happened, but I can tell you that yes, the class action lawsuit has been filed, and if you look through that, like I said, you see lots of specifics in terms of people and impacts and who did what, who didn't do what, and that type of thing. So. Well, yes, that lawsuit is against both. So it involves many different people who are named in the suit, and it includes the local level officials. So even though, according to what I read, the city council voted to switch back to Detroit's water, and the person in charge did not do that, from what I understand. So that person has been individually named, and many people have been individually named. So, and I'm not sure then, in terms of the state EPA, if people are named there as well. That's a good question, but yeah, it's worth looking at. It's all available online.
We have time for one more, by the way.
Okay.
They've done clinics testing women that are pregnant, women that are breastfeeding, and children under the age of 6. They're not testing anybody over the age of 6, and they're not testing the elderly. So my question is, what kind of negative health effects are going to be happening to us in like 5 years? Is this still going to stay with us? How long does lead stay in your system?
I guess I'll start by saying that none of us are health professionals, so that is a great question for your doctor. And if you are concerned about it, please go talk to your doctor and have your blood tested. And then I think that would be a wonderful place to start, because what you'll find out, hopefully, is that your levels are not elevated, and then you can have peace of mind. And then the rest of it, like what happens if, I certainly don't feel qualified to kind of give you medical advice on that, but I understand the concern, especially I have young kids. What if my children had elevated levels, and that kind of anxiety that would continue until you are tested, until you know yes or no. So I would certainly be rushing to my doctor and getting that test, just not because necessarily there's a huge health risk, but just for the peace of mind.
Yeah, I would say that most of the documented cases of significant health effects have been in cases of acute exposure, where someone was exposed to extremely high levels of lead at a very brief period of time, or extremely long-term chronic exposure to very low levels. And so if there was just a short-term exposure to very low levels, you are definitely in the lowest risk category in terms of possibilities of exposure. Again, that's not to, none of us are health professionals, I don't want to say, that makes you definitely be okay, but just to put it in the perspective of the context of other health effects that have been observed in a lot of other cases.
I think that's a question answer. Feel free, like the reference I was making to the New York Times also, they have a huge database. It's not just the article, a large database together with the Environmental Working Group. You can see many different water systems across the U.S. Alliance is on there, and they tested for chemicals that go above and beyond the Safe Drinking Water Act, so that's pretty interesting. But you can also, there's information about the pediatrician too in Flint who helped figure out the lead levels, because that was a little bit of a sleuthing situation. But as we get more information, things continually change, and I think that's the difficulty, is the uncertainty. There's a lot that we don't know. there are only 91 items on that list that are regulated. There are 60,000 potential substances that we come in contact with that a lot of them we don't know that much about. So.